around the United States, but the reason why we do what we do, the foundation of everything we do is education. So yes, you just enjoyed beautiful nibbles and some great gins and aperitivos, but why we're sitting here is we have gathered some experts from not only all over the world, but all over the country who have been doing what they're doing for a very long time. They also have a huge historic insight into what is happening, into what has happened, into the category of gin. I want to start with some housekeeping. One of them is there are 4 seats right here in front. If anyone thinks they might have a hard time being in the back, hearing, seeing, being engaged, there are seats here. We would ask you to not change your seats through the seminar because we are videotaping this seminar for educational purposes for those outside of you who are sitting here. This is a wonderful room. Thank you to James. Thank you. One gorgeous 33 wine bar here. They always have an aperitivo and some ready for me here, but they were very nice to allow us daytime to use their space, okay? That being said, we do not have a microphone. It seems like it has good, we can hear each other in here if we do stay quiet. Of course, you're gonna want to make comments with the person next to you. If you could keep that at a minimal, because we will be picking up a lot of that background noise in the video, okay? So just out of respect and allowing everybody else to hear it once we go live with these things, if we could keep it down. We have our Ginworld ambassador, Angie, here, that may come and ask you to quiet down if we're getting loud.
Can everybody turn their phones on silent?
Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
There are some of you who maybe leave prior to the end. No problem. If you could just be respectful and quiet on your way out. Okay? No problem.
Natasha.
Is there a back way?
Yeah, if you want to leave, you can go out through the tasting room, right through this walkway, and go out the front doors, just unlock the deadbolt.
That would be really
out.
appreciated.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right.
I'll unlock it now. It'll be fine.
Thank you, James. I hope everyone has a water. Okay. For you, you can of course go through the front door. Okay. You might actually, yeah, you're fine. Just okay. We're really excited for you to be here. This is a beautiful turnout, and thank you for your time. If a few of you have not met me yet, my name is Natasha. I like gin a little bit. I have opened a gin bar here in St. Louis, Missouri called the Gin Room. It is inside of a restaurant that's called Cafe Natasha. We've been there for 35 years. I am 12, so you know we do the math in that way. Every single person who is on this panel means so much to me in many, many ways. And these are not only influencers, guiders, people who are in the field, people who are creating the gins that have taken us where we are today. So each of them is going to have a very different perspective on what's going on here. I'm thinking you guys might have some questions as well. We would love to answer those questions too. We'll leave a little bit of time at the end of this to answer questions and mingle. Even after that, kind of drinking hour as well to mingle and things afterwards. As again, I know some of you have to leave to attend to the important things in your own life. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce each of our panel members here, and then they are actually, we have conversations about these things all the time, so they're going to have a little bit of lead within themselves as well, okay? So I would like to introduce David T. Smith. David T. Smith, I could go on for days on all the things that he does, but we met as I was fangirling on him over a book that he wrote probably 5 or 6 years ago. Followed him around a conference like a little puppy, and we have now become professional acquaintances who have hopefully mutual respect for each other. So David T. Smith, he had started, well, not started, but he had summerfruitcup.com where he communicates on everything about gin and gins for the last, how long was that published? Ago? 9 years. He has also published 5 books as well. Soon to be 6. Some of the bars and restaurants around St. Louis have a few of his books as well. They're very beautiful guides into not only the category of gin. He recently wrote a Gin Tonica, a beautifully picture book, as well as recipes and history about the gin and tonic. He is very active with American Distilling Institute. He is judging on almost every national and international blind tastings. Anyway, all day. He's important, okay? He also, have any of you heard of Gin Magazine? He is the one who kind of makes the magic happen within there. He is not only a historian, but a gin nerd. I would like to next, and that's this wonderful human being right here. We have Keli Rivers in this beautiful green and umbrella shirt that I am very envious of. I have met Keli Rivers in her, she was working at a bar called Whitechapel. I don't know if any of you know that, but it is the largest gin collection in the Americas. Did I get it?
Yes.
This time I got it right.
Gotta get that South American.
It is the biggest gin collection in the Americas. I would like to say the gin room opened before that. But when I walked into her bar, my mouth dropped, I was drooling, and I was like, please tell me everything. It is such an amazing place. And we sat down while she was behind the bar, and I nerded out with her, and we have become fast friends. She has been working over 20 years in this industry, not just with gin, Geneva, but she's also a huge fan of whiskeys and all of the drinks, where you can find her on the social medias. She currently represents and works for Beam Suntory under the Sipsmith portfolio, and has a lot of knowledge to share with us. I would like to introduce Henry Price. Henry Price, it's his first time coming to St. Louis. We are very excited on multiple levels. Henry Price has a importer called Price Imports. If you have the Droppo here today, that is in his import portfolio. We are very honored in St. Louis. Those of you who are industry here, they are coming in and they have gotten adopted in by a distributor in St. Louis. That distributor's name is Vintegrity, and they will be distributing his portfolio here. I fell in love with his Amaro portfolio, but he has a huge, like if you're a weird and funky thing, he has all of that, okay? Now, aside from the business that he runs, Henry Price has been known as the palate of palates. He also judges with us at the American Distilling Institute. He has such a force that he is the one that he gets put on all the tables that people don't know how to judge, and he really helps out leading that category. He brought, if there are 2 products that are good name droppers to let you know the magnitude of the work he's done in this field. Has anyone heard of Luxardo? Okay. Henry brought Luxardo into the United States well before what it is today. Has any of you heard of Jaeger? Henry has brought in Jaeger into the United States.
My dad.
His father. That's how far this goes, okay? It didn't fall far from the tree. So Henry Price is going to have, again, very different additions to what we're discussing today. Going back here, we have Brad Campus. Has anyone in this room heard of New Holland Knickerbocker? Okay. I'm a little bit of a fangirl as well as to a lot of the gins, but what really is important, I was a gin lover much before I had met New Holland Knickerbocker gin. I was already in love with gin and deep diving into the world of gin maybe 10 years prior to that. When New Holland Knickerbocker hit my bar, it took out, there's a gentleman in this room, his name is Kian. Kian was working at Cafe Natasha. It had not been the gin room at that point. He was behind the bar. He actually forced that in front of my face, and the rest is history. So thank you for Kian for making that introduction. I may not be who I am today without that, so thank you. I would like to say, those of you who do know New Holland, this is the first time ever that a New Holland distiller has come to Missouri to work with us. And so I kind of made it a big deal about this year because it's our 5th year and they're such an integral force. And how long have you been with New Holland Spirits?
Close to 8 years.
Okay. He is now the director of operations of the distillery, but obviously has been the head distiller for a very long time. Speaking of distillers, has anyone heard of another beautiful blue bottle called Bluecoat? No, never? Okay. So we have Sipsmith, Bluecoat, and New Holland. If anyone has stepped into the gin room, you have heard of these gins. This is Aaron, Selya. I don't know, it's funny because it's inside joke, sorry. I'm tired, sorry. Aaron has been distilling Bluecoat. He is not the original creator of Bluecoat gin, but he has been distilling Bluecoat gin for how many years have you been? 5 years with New Holland, with Philadelphia Distilling. The first time I'd gone up to the distillery, he was relatively new there. He put me to work to make his absinthe. It's quite fun. So everyone here has a long history with this, and without further ado, I would like to allow David Smith to move forward with our discussion. So
yeah, well, welcome everybody. It's going to be quite informal. We kind of just let it sort of naturally flow. We've got a decent amount of time, which is always good for these things because the time will very quickly sort of run away from us. So just quickly from the panel, and as we're discussing about the evolution of gin, I'm going to ask each member of the panel to pick a highlight from, say, the last 50 years of where they think is a key kind of turning point in gin. And I think kind of the reason why we talk about the evolution of gin is, in many ways, history is kind of interesting anyway, but also it helps us to understand where we are now, and potentially more importantly, where we might be going in the future. So that's kind of why we'll have this retrospective, or whatever you might want to call it. So, did you want to start? Yeah.
Great, thanks. So,
well, I knew you had it written down on your
I
hand,
did.
so.
Well, you're like, I had a great date. My great date for the perfect date when we first started talking about like one date that really was a turning point. Mine is 1830, but then he's like, no, it's got to be 50 years. I'm like, oh, fuck you. Sorry. Well, but I'm going to talk a little bit about 1830 because 1830 is when coffee basically patented his still, and we have high ability to rectify. So this is, for a lot of us, the turning point in better neutral spirits, easy, cheaper, faster, and also allowed us to have less botanicals in gin, meaning that this London dry style, which was kind of the forefront for a very, very long time until contemporaries started coming around, was the preferred choice. So 1830 is a really great date, not 50 years. But if I have to go to 50 years, being a historian and loving where gin has come and where we're going, I'm going to say 2007, which was when Ransom decided to release their Old Tom gin. This is if you're not familiar with Ransom Old Tom, basically the distillers decided to get historian Dave Wondrich to make an Old Tom gin, because a lot of it, we started with the internet, bartenders started finding these old bartending books, and you go through them, and then the gin section, you're like, what is Holland gin? What is Old Tom gin? And there was this website called Chowhound, and a lot of people go back and forth talking about it. And Dave Wondrich, somebody asked him, because he's a historian, and he was doing a lot of research for Imbibe, asked him about this Old Old Tom gin, and he was just like, well, the best I could say is if you, this is his recipe, and it's really funny, it's really gross, I've made it, and I don't recommend it. If you take a 750 of Jameson and a 750 of Plymouth, which was just re-released in the US, mix them together with a cup of sugar, you have Old Tom. And I read that, and I was just like, well, I'm gonna try it. This is gross. Why are so many of these cocktail recipes with this Old Tom? And that's kind of how it started me down the rabbit hole of my love of Old Tom, is because I wanted to find out why. Why did this stand the test of time? Why did these drinks have it? If this Protestant from Dave Wondrich, you're supposed to know it all, why was it so bad? So 2007 is when they released Ransom Old Tom. So that would probably be mine.
Okay. What was that?
Yeah, so, you know, part of my background here is not historic, which I can't really speak, you know, with authority on this topic at all. It's not really where my interest or passion has been on what has happened. But really I can touch on, you know, New Holland, we're a craft brewery, first and foremost, from 1997. And just some of the exciting pieces that I see with gin that we're doing with Knickerbocker is, you know, I can almost tie it back to craft brewing on all the innovation that's happened in beer. And I'm going to be the beer guy up on this panel a little bit here, but you know, there's so much innovation that's happened in beer, and now we've taken gin into that same kind of category at New Holland. So I can tie it back to that. I mean, again, I'm no historian, but it's an exciting piece that I'm, you know, really part of. I'm happy to be part of applying kind of the innovation that we have in that, you know, that movement to the category that is gin. I think there's probably a lot more innovation to come.
Yes, okay.
All right. Being the senior member on the panel, for me, it kind of goes back to when I started in this business full time in '74. And at that time, my father's company, who, as Natasha mentioned, was the Western U.S. importer for a lot of German spirits, aside from Jägermeister. And we imported a product, we actually had 2 Steinhager gins. So Steinhagen's a town in Germany that really was the capital of juniper style, if you call it. It is gin, it's got juniper in it, but they call it Steinhager. And it came in a ceramic crock, which all the companies at that point in Steinhagen used. In the ensuing years, the categories vanished in Germany. And there's a large company, I forget who it is now, that still has one of the brands. But the one I had the most fun with, we imported 2 or 3 of them, but one of them called Yuckemower, but the way that the old German J is, with the lines on the J and the J reversed, it looked like Fuckemower. So it was my easiest to sell gin I've ever sold, because I could give you a case of the Fuckemower, Henry, and it got me to really enjoy gin. Now that at that time, the customers were really the German clubs. There was still a lot of German clubs here, soccer clubs, social clubs. The Germans that had come after the war and opened butcher shops and delis and the restaurants, there was lots of them. I mean, they've since then vanished, because by about the late 60s, the German economy turned, got over the war, things really started changing, and far fewer Germans started coming over to America because there was plenty of money over there and things were really happening. And we continued to do well with that, with Yuckemower and the other Steinhagers. And then moving a little closer in history, and we were talking about this earlier, when I kind of experienced, because I've just always personally really liked gins. I just like the flavor. I like a gin and tonic. I like a gin cocktail. It's such a versatile spirit with so much flavor, and it works across so many different cocktails. But then I'm trying to recall, but it was around the mid-90s when we imported Old Raj gin, a style that had been made by Cadenheads over in the UK. The spirit base is bought from William Grant. They do the botanicals to add saffron. It was named Old Raj after the British aristocracy that at the time in the 1800s was, I guess, pretty much running India. Some people took that offensive, but that also helped create, I think, a little buzz for it. And Old Raj came in at 110 proof. And so it was a really powerful gin. And I felt, will a $60 gin sell? You know, this is mid-90s. And to my surprise, for the next several shipments, it kept selling out, selling out. And I started seeing, as I traveled around the country, that it had become a cult gin. You know, as we've moved on since then, there's now a lot of great gin, and there's a lot of innovation in gin, and a lot going on. But for me, historically, personally, this is my 45th year in this business, which is hard to believe. You know, I'm still doing it, but because it's really a lot of fun, and then there's great young people like this group to work with. So, all right.
So, I didn't look up an exact date, but
Okay.
Steel. Yeah, I know.
Wow.
That's
There, stop me.
I'm gonna say the kind of piggybacking actually off what you said, just to say the movement in the bartending world, the on-premise world of reclaiming, you know, cocktail history and you know, going back to traditional cocktails and really revitalizing, you know, the cocktail innovation in the United States I think has been a big you know, force for the gin world and driving not only a lot of demand, but it's asking a lot more of gin producers as well, asking for you know, sometimes more traditional flavors, but also new and innovative flavors out of gins. And I think that's probably been the biggest thing that I've seen on the producer side, you know, that's shifted things.
Good. Great. I guess I'm happy to take questions throughout if that's all right. If it's okay with you.
We want to.
Yeah.
Is there someone
We can discuss it, but I think
who had
quite
a
keen to
specific
kind of get
question
people involved.
that would like to, and if not, we can go straight back in. Yes, sir.
Just one question. So I was thinking about this as you all were talking, and so, and maybe I'm off base in this, but I was thinking in the spirit world, gin is really, and it plays off of what you were saying about brewing, but it really is sort of the only spirit that I could think of off the top of my head that the creator takes so much influence in the botanicals chosen and that sort of thing. Whiskey, I mean, I'm not saying there's not a lot of choices for the distiller. There's barrel char and all of that, but gin is unique, it seems, in my mind, in terms of adding things and choosing ingredients and doing that in the spirit world that creates something that's very interesting for cocktail riffs, right? I mean, you can play with a lot of different flavors, go in a lot of different directions. So am I thinking straight in terms of, are there other spirits that people choose such a direction in terms of what they add?
So I think you make a good point about the importance of botanicals in gin. One of the other interesting things that you kind of slightly touched on is, unlike most other spirits, although there's vodka as well, you can make gin out of whatever base spirit you want to. So whereas you might have restrictions with whiskey or with rum and things like that, with gin you want to make it from molasses, you make it from molasses. You want to make it from apple spirit or from pear or from grain. There's a huge range of what you can do. I think that's part of the reason why you see gin being made in so many different countries around the world. But and then in addition to that, you've got all the aspects of botanicals. And there are other botanical spirits like absinthe and aquavit and things like that, and we're starting to see more of those come out. But I think, yeah, you're right, gin is kind of, that is a big sort of difference. It's one of the ones you can make without actually having to do the fermentation and the distillation. It's a different approach.
I also think that it's one of the spirits that you can ride the current trend, because there is no aging for it. So it's like all of a sudden there is back and forth for recipe development, but it's like, okay, your customers are demanding this style. Let's see what we can do to help feed into that style, more so than any other spirit. It's like, okay, citrus gin's all the rage. Let's get into citrus gin. We've got some ideas, which makes it for distillers and also for enthusiasts really exciting because it is almost an instant. Well, it's not instant because there's a lot of work in distilling. Sorry, can't remember that. But it is fairly quick in the process of the evolution of getting things done.
I guess it's second. I mean, if we were thinking of, let's just say that we realised that there was going to be a great rush on having, I don't know, a clove gin. How quickly could you turn that around? It's a matter of months, would you say?
Yeah, and the label process really takes everything.
The formula, the TTB formula approval, that's the baseline.
If you look at the TTB formula, gin as a category, like the only guardrails it has is predominantly flavored with juniper.
Right.
That's pretty much it. So,
And actually on that note, and I'm sure you guys have probably discovered that, but because we import so many different products, a lot of times we'll be dealing with something that is called a gin where it comes from, but then the TTB here with their rules, which are, they make a lot of logical sense, but they also box you in at times. And we'll get products that they come back, we want it to be a gin, and they go, this is a distilled spirit specialty. I go, no, because that's nowhere land. You know, to consumers, there are sections in stores called distilled spirit specialty. So now you're sitting in and we import products that don't have a category definition by the TTB, and so we have to put things like vodka on it when they're really not a true vodka because they're not called distilled, but we go with what we can do because we're willing to go that extra step of selling something that's that hard to sell, but because we really are passionate about showing it to people. But in the gin world, that can be a real challenge because of the TTB's rules. So like we were saying here, basically it's a neutral spirit flavored with juniper, and then that's only the baseline.
I think this is one, and I'll come to you in a second. But the point you made about importing products that couldn't be called gin in the US. So, for example, best-selling gin in the UK, possibly in Europe, but certainly in the UK, is Gordon's Gin. But it's at 37.5 ABV, and in the US, gin can't be called gin unless it's 40. So, like the best-selling gin in the UK, if you wanted to bring it here and sell it in exactly the same strength, couldn't do it. Wouldn't be called gin.
You actually have to put diluted on it at that point. That works great for consumers. I want to buy a premium product that says diluted with what?
Next trend.
Oh no, just going back to the original point that because of the TTB definition for gin is so broad, it allows you to use the full spectrum of legally allowable botanical ingredients to put into it. So really, it offers a lot. But there's other categories too that offer similar sort of.
But it is a better creative space for the distiller than say bourbon, which has some fairly strict definitions about what gets called bourbon, and not that there's not room in that, but maybe more so in the gin world for the distiller to be creative and create new things and very quickly.
Right.
And that's a good segue into some other topics. Thank you, Jim.
Sure.
Okay, that brought up a couple subjects. Is there something you wanted to directly go into?
Yeah,
Great.
Given that we were talking about new things, I wanted to very quickly set the scene and Kelly's going to handle this. Quite often you might see a brand will come out and it'll say, oh, we're based on this recipe from 1750 or from 1800 and that kind of things. And I think, again, when we understand where we are now with gin, it's probably quite useful to understand if we did go back 150 years and we were drinking gin, what sort of products, is it 150, say 200 years? But anyway.
It's a little bit,
Yeah.
a little bit more, right around there. You got
About 200, say 200 years, say.
Yeah.
So if we go back 200 years, what would you use to say, right?
Alright.
So, but roughly, what sort of would be the how would the gin then be different to what we were tasting now?
Well, first of all, before the 1830, remember, really great day, 1830. Before that, a lot of the gins were going to be a lot woodier, a lot grainier. A lot of the distillation would have essences added afterwards. It would have oils added afterwards. We would be doing this more of an idea of compounding gins, because we had a certain amount of distillers that you could then go and get a barrel, which was just how they housed it, or held it, bring it over to your shop and add your own flavorings to it to make it your own. So this was the idea of bathtubing, as another common term for it. But this was a lot oilier, viscousy, and not as refined and soft and palatable until column distillation came from. But then again, you also had a little bit more of the idea that everything was dry. Like you didn't have the idea of fresh botanicals is very relatively new in the world, because again, it was oiled or dried because you only got to harvest them once a year, and then you had to hold them until you needed them again.
Yeah, and I guess you were talking about barrels and how, you know, landlords or publicans or whatever would be mixing their own gins, and they'd buy in this gin and they would be diluting it because they would want it to go a bit further, and then they might add things like...
Yeah, so if you talk about the first style of Little Tom, you would get it knocked at the back of your door, a guy would have a barrel, you take that barrel, you put it in 5 other barrels, and then you would add water. And all of a sudden now you had something gin that was watered down. So what they would add was like turpentine. Let's add some turpentine to it to make it taste more like gin, because turpentine and juniper, sure, that's the same thing. But turpentine tastes like turpentine, it doesn't taste like gin. So what then they would do is they would add botanicals, and a lot of this would be like licorice root or more florals and even like nuts, nutshells, anything you do to mask the turpentine smell. So now, or taste. So now you have something that kind of tastes like gin, doesn't taste horribly bad, but doesn't give you that hangover that good gin gives you. So then what they would add to it is wood grain alcohol, which is the stuff that made you kind of go a little mad and, cut up your ear and die.
And of course, sometimes it'd be cloudy.
Sometimes it'd be cloudy, yeah.
And to stop it being cloudy, you'd add oil of vitriol, which is sulfuric acid. So,
all the good things, right? This is the stuff we want to drink. And so again, this is kind of where a lot of the flavor profiles. So if you ever have a chance to taste gins, even from the early 1900s to even to like 1960, you can taste a lot of this like woody, earthy angelica, because they were using that to kind of, again, cover up, even though we had column distillation, it wasn't necessarily the highest proof or the most neutral.
So at least turpentine is pine-based, right?
Yes. Yeah. So we.
So everything originated from Ginnisaur, the Dutch courage. That's the original?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, and I was going to come on to Ginnisaur as well, but yeah, there's the historical links of gin come from Ginnisaur, but I think by this point, a lot of, certainly after continuous distillation, and really the difference with this, we talk about this continuous distillation, is just that the alcohol that you could produce to make your gin from was that much purer. It's more heavily rectified. It was, you almost look at it as a blanker canvas for the botanicals. That's kind of the approach. We will come on to Ginnisaur, but that was the historical kind of starting point. But by this point, I think
yeah, we're talking. So we're thinking of Ginnisaur into what we think of it now as like 1600s. The old Tommy or the barrel with the turpentine, we're talking about mid to late 1700s, and then again 1830s, that really great date that everyone's going to remember. That is when we're starting to see, at least in Scotland and Ireland, column distillation. It didn't actually come into England until roughly the later 1800s, like 1890 is when Coffee's son brought it into the UK.
Yeah.
Let's say you had a good, decent quality bottle of gin from 100 years ago, an antique bottle. How is the flavor development, degradation? Does it keep well with some of those more delicate flavors? Is it all just muted?
I know Keli's done.
Well, look, here's the thing we got to remember, that if we go back 100 years, and maybe I'll digress just for a second into Amaros, because Amaros, the classic Italian Amaros, dealt with ingredients that you would gather by horseback or horse and buggy within the circumference of a reasonable length of time. You didn't go like 3 days out. You went a few hours out. So Amaros became the flavor of that region. And gin, back that far, would be with the botanicals that were available. And later on, when David brings up Geneva, you get into that, because the Dutch West Indies Trading Company was really one of the very first. The Dutch were the global explorers at that time, and they brought the spices and those things back to Holland initially. And so you started seeing flavors. So you go back 100 years, which now is the early 1900s, you know, we started having ships go around the globe, but there wasn't the proliferance of the different ingredients that you would work into gin today, because it doesn't matter where you are today, you have access to it all. So you know, I mean, I have one gin in my portfolio that's made with 30 different botanicals. The majority of them are local in one area, but that's because they're not being grown there. Otherwise, no. You know, so it's, I think if we were to get our hands on gins from that time, it would go a lot back toward to what Kelly was saying, in that it would be a much rougher spirit than, you know, what we see today.
Yeah, so
We're gonna go back to.
well, just really very quickly, just because I've had with Whitechapel, I got to use someone else's money to taste a lot of old spirits and not have to pay the money for them. With between 5 and 7 years in a bottle, citrus goes away, first thing. And between the year 7 and 10, juniper goes away. So the two major flavor profiles, juniper and citrus, are totally gone. And we're talking also about a lot of the vintage stuff you're seeing from the 70s, 80s, 60s, 50s are going to be this London dry flavor, which juniper and citrus are your major things. So,
Well, Kelly, even if the bottle's sealed,
Even if the bottle's
never been opened,
sealed, yeah.
no fluorescent light or anything on it,
it is there.
you've discovered and tasted.
There is only one bottle that I've ever had that I was like, wow, this is good and has the integrity of what it is, and that was a loose 1950s fine cask mellow that they finished it in sherry cask. It was delicious and great, and I was like, wow, this is really something special. I'm glad I spent $200 on this bottle. But a 1950s beefeater, not so much. Not that I mean, I love beefeater, but not again. Geneva's just looks a little bit is just be careful because they're were bottled at a much lower proof and things might still be living in it.
And we're gonna let them get back into their, no, I was just saying, we're gonna just stop questions for a minute, let them get back into it, just so we go back on track for a minute. And then there's gonna be plenty of opportunities for you to nerd out with them after as well.
So, well, I said we were going to talk about Ginnasaur, so we'll talk about it. I'm also going to be a bit controversial. So,
Never.
So I shall ask the panel, and everyone, I'm cheap, what everyone thinks. So there is this really great connection between gin and Geneva. It's a historical connection. But there is some questions and some thinkings as to whether or not it might be time for Geneva to have its own, be more of its own thing, as opposed to being always so linked with gin, so that it can, as a great spirit that it is, it can really shine. And this is kind of a view that I've started to hear with some of the newer brands that are coming out. They really want to move it away somewhat, because the way that you treat Geneva and the way that you treat gin are often very, very different. So I'm keen to know what the panel think about that. I'm keen to know what anyone else thinks as well, just because we're talking about Geneva. Anyone want to? Henrik, well, you bring some in, right? So
we bring in two styles. One very accessible, very fruity, I guess, if you would want to use that term, lighthearted, and we bring in a very classic style from a company called Herman Janssen, which is the oldest producer in Schiedam, Holland, sort of the capital of Geneva. And one thing that Kelly mentioned, which kind of really ties in, as they get older and the flavors you lose, these Genevers, when they were originally produced, they're a combination of grain, and you do the grain distillation, and then you go through a second production of adding the botanicals. Then Geneva kind of died out in the 80s. People stopped buying it. I was handling Bachma back in the early 80s, which was one of Holland's biggest brands at the time. And You know, and what I've seen is exactly what Kelly alludes to. So even sitting in the barrel, as we get to these Genevers that have barrel age on them, it tastes like whiskey. They have a touch of a botanical in there, but they taste a lot like whiskey, because that you're not going to get rid of. They're sitting in wood and they're aging, and especially over time. So the other one that we bring in is you know, and I have both of them with me. We'll have them at the gin tasting. The By the Dutch is the more lighthearted one, and there's old, you know, meaning old and young Genever, and the difference is production style. Old Genever has to have a particular percentage of the malt spirit, meaning the malt wine, the fermented grain distillation product, versus the young Genever, which is without that without the spirit. It doesn't refer to age at all.
I think the other big difference between, at least in my understanding, generally between Geneva and gin, is the quantity of botanicals in Geneva is significantly less.
Yeah.
I'm a 3-to-1 producer, and we were talking about quantities, and he was talking probably about a tenth of what you would have.
Yeah, it's it is pretty low.
Yeah.
It is pretty low. I don't know exact percentage, but it is pretty low. But I agree with what Dave's saying, is that, you know, it historically does have some connection with gin, but I think what we're really trying to do now is get our own spot on the shelf with bars and restaurants and consumers. You know, that gin, that Genever, while it has its historical ties to gin in a certain way, we really like to see it as its own category. But it does tie in. I mean, at the end of the day, it isn't a neutral spirit base. It's a grain spirit base with grain flavors that has then also got botanicals. So it's sort of kind of a marriage between the two.
Anyone else?
Are you guys?
There's someone starting to make a Genever here, and as maybe a new Genever maker.
We messed around with Genever a little bit. I would say that, you know, from a producer's point of view, the big, you know, so gin, especially, you know, like a dry style gin with a really neutral base, when you're crafting the flavors and trying to, you know, develop the, you know, what you want the final product to taste like, it really is just about, you know, trying to balance the flavors of the botanicals together and trying to capture the right window of flavors you're looking for coming out of those botanicals. And there's nothing from the base spirit competing with them texturally or, you know, from a flavor point of view, and so they stand out a little bit better on their own because there's no sort of like interference flavors from the base spirit. Whereas with Genever, it's really all about trying to balance the botanical flavors with the flavors from the base spirit, and still, at least from where we've, you know, played around with so far, we want, because we're a very botanical focused distillery, we want the botanical flavors to stand out. Mm-hmm. And so even though traditional Genevers maybe don't have very high levels of botanicals in them, we actually found we needed to up the amount of botanicals that we put in to be able to have them stand out against the background of the grain, the grain spirit, and yeah.
Well, that's almost kind of in some ways in how like gin has kind of been reinterpreted. It's kind of Geneva.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen a few people do these Ginevers, is what they call them. So they are more flavors and bases, and they're kind of a hybrid between.
Yeah. Some of that also might be from a legal point of view too, because there's Geneva does have at least in Europe has a DOCP adopting certain regions that can produce it. Over here, there's no TTP doesn't have any definitions for Geneva, so
you have to be from those regions.
Oh yeah. Okay. So it's still protected.
Yeah.
So you can't put Geneva on it.
You can't put Geneva on an American gin that is producing a Geneva style gin cannot say Geneva on the bottle. I don't know how one brand out of Tennessee got to do that.
There's actually quite a few that do it here in the country.
But so
it
they
is
do Geneva
geographically
style.
protected.
It is in the U.S. My whole question then for everybody is, who here likes Geneva?
Does anyone not know what Geneva is? And this might be a new word to you, and that's okay. And we can go into a little bit more definition. I know you got
We're actually pronouncing it wrong. It's Geneva.
But yeah, so most of them have heard of it.
So out of those people that like Geneva, how many of you like it better than gin? Okay.
That's really different.
And out of the two people that raised their hands, are you guys mostly whiskey drinkers? Yeah. That is kind of what we're trying to say is from a bartender's point of view, as a buyer, someone who's run bars, trying to get people, especially whiskey drinkers, which is going to be the majority of the U.S. market, as opposed to gin, trying to get a whiskey drinker to drink gin, it's really great to put a Geneva in front of them. But if they say, oh, this is gin, I like it, they go to another bar and they get a gin and it's not Geneva, we might lose them. So this is, I think, the conversation of actually having it two separate categories.
Because I think just for a very long time, and I totally understand why, because basically there was nowhere for it to sit. And so it's close-ish relation, you know, the grandfather of gin, as it were, so it kind of fits there, so I can kind of see that. But yeah, but that's why I think this conversation now is interesting and also potentially very good. Bringing out more.
But you drink it differently than gin.
Oh.
I mean, yeah, gin is the perfect spirit to make cocktails, right? 2/3 of all classic cocktails are made with gin. Why? Because it marries, carries, and elevates. It makes it better. Geneva cocktails, there are a few historically, but most people drink it in a cup scooch, which is just like a shot with a beer. So having it in its own category is really great. What's really funny in the U.S. is our first licensed distillery in the U.S. in Staten Island was a Geneva distillery that wasn't using the tannins.
Also, if you want to look up Geneva cocktails, the Jerry Thomas cocktail book, because there wasn't a lot of gin around in 1862 when he wrote the book, the cocktails in there are all made with Geneva. And so that's an interesting kind of crossing bridge there.
I mean, we here in the U.S. up until the mid-1900s, early 1900s, up until Prohibition, we preferred Geneva. We imported it 19 liters to 1 of this imperial style.
Yeah.
So we really liked it. However, when we start talking about when we would go over to Europe during war and such things, we got a liking for this lighter, drier style of London Dry. And this is kind of, we would bring it back. It was exploration of the new thing. Everybody wants the new shiny thing.
I think also the growth of cocktails and how mixable gin is, plus the greater availability of ice.
Yeah. Ice, mixing abilities, 1 in 1. Also the fact that it happened to be cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah, the process for making Geneva is crazy. I mean, it has to be one of the more expensive processes of making a distilled spirit because of all the steps involved, the ingredients involved, and
I think the reason why we're not seeing a lot of American distilleries making Geneva is because the U.S. drinks 0.0001% of all the Geneva in the world. So I always, being a lover of Geneva, I always say you have to drink it to get it.
There was a quick question about a clarification of an imperial Geneva.
Oh, so when you look at the logbooks coming into New York from the importing, there was Geneva and then Imperial Gin. And Imperial Gin is what they were labeling London Dry at the time, or dry style.
But largely stuff that would have been imported.
Yeah.
So just jumping on that point as a sort of another sort of segue. So when even I think like up until the outbreak of the First World War, a lot of the gin, not the gin that was being drunk in the US was being imported. And then when the First World War came, a lot of the stuff that was coming out of England, the supplies dried up because, you know, there was a war on, right? And it's looking into the history of a gin called El Bartin. Anyone ever heard of El Bartin? Very unusual kind of thing. It's the gin that's called for in the first aviation recipe. And doing some research into this, what it turns out that this gin was that someone had bought the recipe and the equipment from an old distillery in London just before the First World War. They brought it over to, I think it was New Jersey, I think is where it was based. And that's where they started their distillery. And so their point of difference was the fact that they were, I think, essentially saying, we got the recipe, we got all of the ways that they do it in London, and we're making it in New Jersey. And so they were kind of the only people that could provide this kind of style of gin. And then subsequently it kind of died off because there was more competition from a lot of other people. Right, well, fast forwarding from, and this was there a question?
No, I think we're ready to
Okay.
move.
Fast forwarding from deep history to the last 10 years, bring it back up to date. Again, we'll go and speak to the panel, and I can speak a little bit about this as well. I think there's been a huge change in gin in the last 10 years, and even in the last 5 years, but certainly those 10 years is a big part of that. So, if the panel have any ideas on what they think has helped this boom in gin that we've seen, and also, again, if there's any like real key moments that you think of. We'll start. We should go last, so I won't get first this time.
I think, like I mentioned earlier, the craft cocktail or the classic cocktail is sort of people, bartenders rediscovering classic cocktails and calling for like you said, 2/3 of classic cocktails call for gin. So I think that's been a big thing. I think also the general craft distilling in the United States coming up, people starting distilleries and realizing, the trend like we saw in the beer world as well is that American brewers tend to take classic styles and then reinvent them and play with flavors and riff off them and make new things out of them. And I think the craft distilling world has done the exact same thing with gin, just for 15 years offset from brewing. So, but I think those two things kind of coincided, in the early 2000s to really just change the flavor profile of what gins were available, and so finding gins that people found more accessible than the really classic London dry styles were available for them, and at the same time people calling for bartenders calling for more gins.
I mean, I think we were discussing, you mentioned earlier, when Bluecoat came out, and it's that more focused towards that citrus profile, and beforehand there wasn't too much. I guess Beefeater was probably the closest that was the most kind of citrusy, but that was a sort of warmer, sort of orange sort of flavour, as opposed to that bright, sort of more like lemon. Did you have any thoughts on things going in the last 10 years?
Yeah, I will dovetail off yours a little bit, but I think just in general the drinking culture and the consumer base, with craft beer and spirits, people started asking for a lot different stuff, and the innovation. I mean, those of you at ADI, how many distillers were there 10 years ago versus where we're at now? We're over 1,500 in the country right now, I think.
Getting close to 2,000.
Getting close to 2,000. So just from a business cash flow standpoint, you got to come out with a clear spirit. And most of these distillers are landing on gin. You have to be different. So it's forcing a lot of innovation out there on just gin. But the cocktail culture is educating consumers on what, how to drink gin, and just innovating on a cocktail in the glass in front of you has been a huge piece of it as well.
I'm sure, certainly when we talk about drinks and stuff, in your experience, that's definitely something that you can, I imagine, can see how it's changed. So, and can you maybe some examples of drinks that have been particularly popular?
I think a lot of it has to do with changing people's preconceived notion of what gin is. That's number one. And then the number two is making it accessible and personal. And one of the easiest way to do that is having someone you trust in a bar guide you along what they really enjoy or what they like. So a lot of people that they don't, I tell people that Beefeater, again, because it is such an iconic brand, is a very citrusy driven gin, and they're like, no, it tastes like Christmas trees. I've looked at a lot of Christmas trees. I have yet to find the gin tree. I keep looking at that magical tree that I just have all year round and just make myself gin. But that's what people's idea is. And it's because they've had that one bad experience. And I'm like, hey, you've grown up, gin's grown up, let's try it again. And trying to get them to trust you into it. And cocktails is a really great way to do it. Because they might I didn't know that was gin. I would have not known that. And that's a great way to do it. But I think in the last 10 years, one of the things I think really took a turning point, you saw it in Europe first, and then you definitely saw it here, or starting to see it in the US, is the innovation of tonic. Or getting things, gin has grown up, tonic has really grown up. And it's, I call Fever Tree out because, water's fine.
Sorry.
But Fever Tree, I kind of say that it is Starbucks of tonic. Because Fever Tree got like most of America that was still in the gun, not calling out their tonics, to be able to be like, okay, here's a brand, something that I know is better, and I'm okay with spending more money for it. Right? Starbucks, nobody wanted to pay $1 for a cup of coffee until Starbucks was on every corner, and they're like, $4 for a cup of coffee, that's a deal.
Yeah, we
now all
usually
these
get
little,
that much for our alcohol.
yeah, now little distiller, or little roasters are able to make a living roasting their own beans, and now we're starting to understand roasting beans, and this is what's happening with tonic. The idea of good tonic, because yes, you start in the bar and you trust your bartender and you get a drink, but are you going to make that 6-ingredient drink at home? Probably not. What you're going to make at home is probably going to be a gin and tonic. And as a distiller, as someone who is a supplier, getting someone to know your name brand and then getting them to go to the liquor store to buy your product, to take it back home and then influence their friends that way is kind of the steps in which you want to go.
You know, I'd like to throw something in here too. You know, after bringing in Old Raj, I wanted to own my own brand of gin. And I had a number of distillers say, oh, I can replicate that like that. And I learned at that point, because I'm not a distiller, that it's not that easy to make a good gin. All the different samples I got, I go, not really. And so as you go around and sample the gins, and like Kelly's been in a unique position working in the amazing gin bar she used to be in, and sampling so many different ones, I think you'll agree there is an enormous spectrum in gin, from marginal to amazing, and I think what I find is, especially people that are in my age, they have some memory of college, which was another century ago, of having a bad experience on gin, that stuck, and whatever that gin was they were drinking was obviously something they got hammered on and haven't touched it since. And it goes to what Kelly said, and it goes to making good product, which is really the bottom line for everything, and it's really what's, like she said, the tonic business has grown up, the gin business has grown up, the spirit business has grown up. There is a competitiveness out there now to, that lifts the bar, and I think we're kind of in the golden age because of how many American craft distillers there are, what's happened in Europe, and I did want David to touch on a little on what's happened in Europe with gin, because it hasn't happened here yet, but it's crazy what happened in Europe.
And I think it's worth talking about whenever you're ready about it, like whenever you're
sure.
in an area.
Just picking up, I mean, as an importer, and in the last few years, I know you've had a lot of people approach you about their gins, and I wondered if you could say a little bit about, but also stuff that's not just from the US or Europe. But
no, I mean, I know exactly what David's alluding to. I got approached not too long ago from a guy in Peru. Well, it's not from Peru, but he's using a Peruvian grape spirit base, basically marrying pisco and gin, back to the beginning of this seminar when David said gin can be made with so many different spirit creation of the base, where pisco being a grape distillate that is not aged. And then also infusing the botanicals into that. We now get approached on gin almost weekly.
Got 3 emails already.
Yeah, almost weekly. I mean, from India, from Africa. I mean, there is some amazing gin out of Africa. And South Africa. I mean, the problem we run into on some of these, I've literally just fallen in love with them. We can't get them approved here. They have ingredients in them that if they don't have an FDA approval status, then the TTB, the Treasury and Tax Bureau, won't approve it. In the gin, so some of them we said, how much can we put in it? We just went through one that we spend a year. We're going to be bringing in Galway gin. And this young lady and her family that make it, they use, out of Galway Bay in Ireland, they use a seaweed that grows there. And so we really didn't want to change that ingredient, because that's really what it's about. There are other seaweeds that are allowed, but that one wasn't, for whatever crazy reason. So it doesn't always deal with logic, but so we did go through the whole FDA thing. We got that seaweed approved, and it is really a unique gin. It just has a completely different flavor. So I don't want to say that as an importer, our gins are flying, but I'm such a great believer in this category of the versatility and all the nuances and the interesting, beautiful products that come to the market through it, that, you know, we do keep putting in some, but like David was asking, you know, almost weekly I get another offer from a different gin, almost weekly. And some are hard to turn down, but I gotta sell them too, I can't just buy them.
So, and you're asking about, so I'll answer you. You're there, you want the inside scoop. So, yeah, I think in Europe and in particular in the UK, there's a couple of very sort of key things that are the turning points. So, you know, about 2005, 2006, there started to be a couple of new gins coming on the market. Sometimes they have some new botanical, like there was one with Dragon's Eye and something else in it. And I think, what's Dragon's Eye? Like, no clue, but that was what they were trying to sell. The thing was that it had Dragon's Eye. And then around 2007, 2008, you started to see distilleries, new distilleries start up, mostly in London, but then gradually around that. And so people like Sipsmith and Sacred, and the big difference that made, and I think this is a big part of the reason why gin grows, and it does apply to the US as well and other places, is that before, generally, there was a care about maybe what botanicals were in the gin. I think that was probably started by Bombay Sapphire when they put them in the bottle back in the 80s. But it wasn't until about 10 years ago that people started to care where the product came from. And previously, there'd just be a lot of stuff that was made third party by distilleries in the UK, and people would be very cagey about where the product came from. And you'd ask them, oh, you know, where's the gin made? And they say, oh, it's made somewhere just south of the Thames. And you think, well, there's one distillery that makes gin just south of the Thames, so I know, and it's called Thames Distillery, so that's obviously where it's made. So I think that's a big thing, this idea of location in gin, and that fits into this idea, potentially, which we can talk about as well, the terroir and things like that. But you know, having a gin as you do, and I was going around some gin distilleries yesterday. Just within an hour's drive of it, there's some really great gin distilleries, and it's kind of that aspect of being able to support and care about not just where your food comes from, but also where your drinks come from. I think that's been something that we've seen a lot in the UK. I was doing a tot up recently, and I think there's 200 gin distilleries in the UK, and I don't know.
There's more than 200. Well, gin distillers now. So
gin distillers, very like specifically. People that have their own distillery that make.
So Sipsmith was the first distillery to make gin in London in almost 200 years. The last one was in 1820, which was Beefeater. We're talking about London, City of London, and Westminster because of the swap that took place in 1757. When we got our distilling license in 2019, there were 14 distilleries making everything in England. In 2018, there was 450 distilleries in England making things. 200 of them being gin only.
400 licenses.
Licenses, sorry.
It's very specific.
Excuse me, licenses.
Yeah, it's not the same thing.
But there is about 2,000 labels coming out of London in 2018. But one of the things that Sipsmith tried to do, which was very much because of beer, our two founders really loved, they were living in the United States and they loved craft beer. They loved the idea that everybody knew where the brewery was, you could go down to the brewery, you could talk to the brewers, you could drink with the brewers, that you could have a rotating idea, and that's what they wanted to do with gin in London. They didn't understand why anyone didn't do that. And around that same time, most of the people that were drinking didn't even think about going to the distillery to talk to these people, their favorite distilleries. Yes, Beefeater had their visitor center that would just...
Beefeater as well.
The visitor...
Plymouth was the only place that had a...
But what about the museum that Jared Brown did that opened up in 2007?
Yeah, that wasn't open at the time.
Okay. So, but one of the things that, yes, we get a lot of influence from Europe, but England took the idea of us being able to go to distilleries and ran with it.
Yeah.
And that was something that we were able to influence Europe and most rest of Europe, the US. I mean, if you went to the Japanese bar show last year, 90% of what was being shown was gin.
Wow. In
90%
Tokyo?
In Tokyo, the Tokyo bar show. 90% was gin. And then you're like, hey, where were you guys last year? Oh, we've always loved gin. We've always loved gin. 90%.
Wow. Quick, just when does that happen? That Tokyo?
Man, dates and times.
You know this.
Was it this year?
This year, it hasn't happened this year yet.
Okay.
It's towards the end of the year. It's like August. It's around the same, like right around tails, kind of a little past that.
Gotcha. I have plans to go to Tokyo in the fall, so I was just.
But I don't know the exact date. They don't let me go because then I just bring too much gin back with me. Like you're supposed to be talking about Sipsmith. I'm like, oh look at all the other fun stuff I got.
So that's kind of like the difference with distilleries, and then you also had, coming from Spain, this Spanish style of the gin tonic, which I know is now here, which is great. I love to see that with all of this ice, and it came from hot kitchens in the Basque Country, and that's kind of the reason why it has so much ice. And these interesting garnishes just beyond lemon and lime. That was, for a long time in the UK, that was all the discussion was. People would write like newspaper columns arguing about why it was so much better that you had lemon than lime, and like you're a heathen if you wanted lime in your gin and stuff like that. And there's like I did some research into it. There's probably some technical reasons why lemon and lime might work better with certain things. If you're interested, come and ask me later, or we have time, we want to get into it. And then the other big thing, something else that came out in Spain was what started off as strawberry gin, and it was one brand, and they made strawberry gin, and they were in Valencia, I think. And the people around there, they wanted to drink it because it was lemon. And it was basically a gin which had some strawberry flavour added and some pink colour, and they drank it in a gin and tonic, but it wasn't really gin and tonic, it was pink gin and lemon Fanta. And it really just tasted like strawberry vodka. So really, their pink gin and tonic was a strawberry, it was a strawberry vodka and lemon Fanta. And everything, it was all focused around strawberry. I went to this bar show in North Spain, and everyone seemed to have these strawberry gins, and people would they wanted it really quickly. So like with like a 3-month lead time, they'd ask their distiller to just bring them more gin, and they just added the stuff in Spain and bottled it. And then I thought, oh yeah, this will be the next big thing. And it took about 2 years, and then so I was a bit early, and then it took off. And now we see a huge amount of fruit gins in the UK and in Europe, and you're starting to see it in Australia as well, and you're very just starting to see some more of it in the US. But in the UK, like the last 2 years, the growth has been phenomenal. I mean, we were in Beefeater, and they're putting in new stills just so they can keep up with the production of Beefeater Pink.
Yeah, they put a ceiling and put 2 new stills.
But are the flavors instilled before the distillation process or after?
It's a good question. It's a combination. So some people add some distillate or flavouring afterwards. Mostly it's added afterwards, generally. Other people, and then they add the colour and things. So things like Beefeater Pink would be like that. What smaller brands tend to be doing is getting the gin, macerating it with the fruit, and then sweetening it. So similar to slow gin, but perhaps not quite so sweet and made a slightly higher ABV. And you're going to bars, and people are looking at all the different gins, and they'll say, oh yeah, I want a pink one. And so people are, and of course pink gin historically has a totally different meaning with gin and Angostura bitters, fantastic drink, and it's kind of now got hijacked by these other fruit flavours. And exactly how long that will last, I'm not sure. It has certainly been a lot of, from some of the more established distillers, they're not so impressed with it. Obviously other established distillers have jumped on the bandwagon and they've made it, but then who's going to give you a medal for not making it? It makes the growth in those areas, the potential revenue from making them is really high, and it is bringing in non-typical gin drinkers into the world of gin. Whether they'll stay there and move on, migrate to more traditional styles, I don't know.
I do have a question, because we do have 2 distillers here that make fruit gins, and then the older flower that's just coming out that I saw, that I tasted in Phoenix. It's delicious. I would love to hear like your evolutions and going into
So we make a lot of fruit gins. Recently, over the last 18 months, we've really explored in that area. Knickerbocker is our gin label. We have a Knickerbocker blueberry, and that one just really came from the history. My family is I'm a 4th generation blueberry farmer in Michigan as well. Blueberries are a huge piece of Michigan agriculture. They're all right around New Holland on West Michigan shoreline. It was a really easy combination for us to figure out how to get blueberries into one of our spirits. We decided to go with Knickerbocker. But we've done grapefruit gin. Those are all in distribution at this point. But we have a whole kind of incubator.
Can you describe your process?
Yeah.
Because it's a little bit different than so your blueberry gin, for example.
Yeah, so we'll macerate the fruit before distillation.
So you basically soak it in blueberry and then distill it.
We do it all at the same time with the botanicals, with the juniper.
You have to add sugar?
We back sweeten before bottling, but it's like 1/4 cent or something.
Yeah, because I mean, berries have such low sugar content.
We don't use
That's why they're
the
so
fruit.
good for you.
Right. We don't use the fruit for fermentation in the distillate. We only use it for flavor.
Just like a signature botanical.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But we've done grapefruit now. We got like a mango habanero. I mean, we're kind of getting a little weird with some stuff. The purists might hate us eventually.
What's the reaction? That's kind of that. What's the reaction being from people from these products?
It's usually positive.
Yeah.
We're just messing around. I mean, it's not a big deal for us to make 50 cases or something.
And are people drinking them typically like they're drinking other gins, or are they?
Yeah, and our bartenders will craft a cocktail, around it, on the spectrum or wherever, whatever it is.
I think it brings up a really good point about this is that there are some people that are doing it in a really sort of authentic and quality way in this, and then there are other people that are just like, oh, let's have a jelly donut flavored gin and let's just stick the essence in there that we bought. And now, Bluecoat elderflower.
Yeah, so we were considering whether or not to develop like more of, I guess, what we see in the UK with the fruited gins, where the flavoring of either the fruit or the fruit flavor is added post distillation, it's back sweetened, and it's something in between a dry gin and like a slow gin. Right? So we're debating whether or not to do that, and we were messing around with a bunch of different botanicals that we had in house anyway, and so we just simply started off trying macerating elderflower in our gin, and realized that even without any back sweetening or anything else, that it was really it captured a really great range of flavors coming out of the botanical. And for us, I mean, similar to what Brett was saying, it's just really about messing around and experimenting with things. And we found that it was, it was simple, but it worked and it elevated the spirit, and it was kind of an extension. And, we're not seeing much different consumption pattern with it. People are drinking kind of the same way that they were drinking Bluecoat. There is kind of an interesting thing. I was talking to a bartender in Pittsburgh about how because we're doing the maceration with elderflower post distillation, we're getting some tannins out of the elderflower, and so we're adding some flavor elements, and we're broadening the palate structure of the gin because it's all it's these flavors we can get through a distillation anyway. So it's leading to a little bit more interesting, or a little bit more depth in cocktails because of the tannins.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you make. I think just something to highlight is that when you're distilling botanicals, or if you're just doing like an infusion and a maceration, what flavors will be extracted will be different. And so I think that's also part of the reason why people do this sort of combination. Has anyone got any? I'm quite keen to hear if anyone's got any questions. Gentleman at the back there.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about the innovation that's happening in gin, but also that people have preconceived notions of what gin tastes like. Especially for the distillers, is there any like dream gin flavor combination or style that you really want to make but you just don't think you can sell, and what would that be? And or is that not the case?
flavor like on a pedestal that I think will never work. One of my favorite ones that we've done so far is like lemon basil, and that's like my go-to. It's not in distribution, but that one, you know, from treasure hunting out there and what flavors work, that one is really awesome.
You can try it at the gin room
We have it.
outside of business hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pickle. Basically, I went to a wedding of one of the head distillers of St. George in Alameda, and his wife really loved pickles. And I thought, and so we made, that was a giveaway, was this pickle St. George gin called I'm a Big Deal.
Pickle soup.
Yeah, and it was, I was really wanted to hate it, and I really loved it, and they will never make it, so if anybody else wants to make it.
I hadn't really, sometimes when I talk about gin flavors, I'm like too much of a purist, and I don't think too much about, but from a bigger picture flavor-wise, one of the things that I would really love to see in gin that I don't think would sell very well would be smoke flavor. Like a smoked gin, I think would be excellent. I'm obsessed with, smoke flavored beverages.
Well, there are mezcal gins.
Yeah, I think that we discussed because one of our sister distilleries now is Vago, and we talked a little bit about like using mezcal as a base, and we haven't messed around with that at all. But I think that might be the only
Yeah, I think if the smoke is subtle, you know, because there's that whole spectrum in mezcal from subtle to smoke bomb, but.
Sometimes you get that in the charred barrel-aged gins. They get a smoky flavor.
Yeah.
You guys had talked earlier, I think, Henry, you kind of touched on this about how there was a guy trying to make basically like a grappa gin, and I'm kind of glad you brought that up. I kind of had the luxury of, definitely with some of our more like gin familiar guests, doing flights of gin purely based on what they're distilled out of. You know, like Gin Mare and was when Monopalawa have radically different textures than like Knickerbocker and Bluecoat. Is there ever a time, we also talk about how some like really radical botanical bills kind of disqualify it from being gin if you're a purist. Are there like things to distill out of that you think would disqualify from being gin even though it's juniper forward?
So like, what's the most bonkers botanical example?
Or botanical bonkers, or we're talking about base spirit?
Distill it. Like we talk about the things being disqualified based on botanicals. Can you disqualify something on the base spirit?
In gin?
The only thing I would say, going back to like the combination, like with Geneva, trying to get the base spirit and the botanicals to like balance and play nicely. I just think that there's base spirits that are more challenging and base spirits that are less challenging to balance out, right? I think when you start to talk about super flavorful base spirits like Baijiu or something like that as a base spirit for a gin, I think that would be a real challenge to find, like to get classic gin botanicals to balance with that. Yeah.
Too much competing flavor there.
I think we'll be done. I'm intrigued now.
Yeah.
I'll work on it.
Which is where they put it in.
That's sucky.
Yeah, well, but I think that would be a way to use it as a
Yeah, I mean, I guess like from the base spirit, I think you can pretty much have anything, but if you can't taste the botanicals, there's certain questions as to what's the point.
Yes.
Yeah. From a point of view on botanicals, what about elephant dung?
I knew you were going to bring this up.
Or sheep dung, or turkey.
Yeah, there is a gin that has made it into bottle, into label with elephant dung in it.
There's botanicals foraged from
Yeah, botanicals foraged from elephant dung. It's also a Mountain Dew yellow. I know everyone's really excited to try this, right?
It's actually quite smoky.
Really?
It is.
Is it in the US or?
Just kidding.
Yeah, that's
but also you got to think about it. What we think is outrageous now might not be outrageous. Like when I'm a hoarder of gin, a collector is what I tell my family so they don't worry. But I have one of the first bottles of gin that I ever bought that was the most expensive, which was a $350 bottle of gin, was from Cambridge Distillery, and it was anti-gin. ANTI, and it was basically a traditional London dry thing, but part of the distillate was from foraged redwood ants. And they said every bottle had X amount of ants in it, and it was like, ooh, people were like on the interwebs all getting mad at it. But if you think about it now, I know at least 6 gins, at least 6 gins that have ants as one of the tannins.
Flight of ant gins.
Yeah, we have a flight of ant gins and the ADI gin. So it's like what we might think now, elephant dung is maybe like the most wacky thing we've ever heard about, but maybe in 5 years, it's not super wacky anymore. Like they make gin with distill what? Hope. Well, they do collagen. Yes, the anti-aging gin. But I mean, it's like we're always kind of moving forward. And when you're talking about these outrageous things, I really do believe, as someone who loves this category, that things are going to fall away. There is going to be a thinning of the herd. Things are just like not going to stick around, and the things that really have substance that people like are going to be here. I mean, I'm the bubblegum gins and the toasted marshmallow gins and the pink and the blues and stuff. Maybe they're just here like a flash in a pan, like the whipped vodka flavors that aren't really being anymore. So I'm sorry if I insulted anyone who likes the whipped. It's a company that I work for, and they put a stop on all the pinnacle flavors, so that's a good vote for us. But I do think that there will be a culling. It's coming. Purge. I love the gin.
Any other questions from anyone else?
Yeah, we're gonna wrap up soon.
Yeah.
I think we got a lot of the questions throughout the group answered. Was there any specific ones you guys could filter through real quick? Anyone wanted any? Yeah. Is there something you wanted to end on?
So I guess as we talked about the past and the present, we kind of look to there's a two-parter. One is what is like the most sort of cutting edge of trends kind of seen in the last 6 months, and possibly what might, and thus an extension of what might be the future of what might be happening in gin. Always difficult to predict. So Kelly, you can go first.
Thank you. I hate this question. Why can't we just get through the trend we're already in? Why do we have to, I really like this trend. But I think one of the things.
What is this trend at the moment?
This one that the trend that I think really, the idea of terroir. Terroir is very, very important, especially when we have so many gins on the market. You have your normal 5 that everybody knows, and then you have the local thing, right? And the local thing is one that you can associate, you can champion, you can put your flag in it because that's where you are, that's your sports team, you're rooting for it. And so you have what makes it local besides area, but what they're making it from, like blueberries, because that is something that you can talk about. You can get other people on board on this blueberry because you have that story. Again, we're trying to make gin personable. But for me, that travels a lot, and I go into the liquor store and I see all the gins on the shelf, which I really like to see all the gins on the shelf. What am I gonna, if I only have room for 2, either in my bag or on the back of my home bar, which one am I gonna pick? And I think having an iconic or a local ingredient or a signature botanical is making it kind of stand out more, which is great, except for the fact that if you talk about scalability, that what if this takes off? How are you going to have that local juniper for always and forever? And so I think this is kind of where we're trying to think. It's the trend we're in now, but it's also something that we have to think for the future to make it so it's not just a local gin anymore, because we need to survive in the future.
Yeah, I think for me it's we import a few gins, but we have one from the Saar River Valley in Germany called Ferdinand's, and they have 30 botanicals, and really everything that's in that gin, including building the still. There's 3 partners. Andreas, who built the still, who's also built 60 stills for people like Jacopo Poli, the grappa producer. But he built his still specifically for making this gin. That's local. There's a winery partner, Zilliken. Dorothea Zilliken's one of the top 10 female white wine producers in the world. She's a partner. There's Zilliken wine in that gin. And then the local botanicals and the 2 partners, the 2 brothers that put the whole concept together. Ferdinand's is named after basically the Duke of the region from another time period. It's called Forstmeister Gaunant, so it was it was his kingdom. And that sort of provenance, which goes to like the blueberries and that provenance, I think, is important, and it's something that we, that I especially, or a small specialty importer like us, can really hang our hat on. Personally, I'm not worried how much they can source. I'm more worried about finding people to enjoy the product. I don't know what their capability is. There is a limit on it. The stills aren't very big. The process is very lengthy, and the product is exceptional. And the biggest pain in the ass is, because they use silicon wine in it, they use cork in the bottle, and I never have a corkscrew with me anymore. I gave up the wine business a long time ago.
Just push it in.
Yeah, we got
Well, but isn't that like where wine is in terms of, you have a certain valley and it goes on the label and you sell the provenance.
Yes, it's all on there with signatures from all the people.
That's what it feels like to me. That's where gin is going to.
Yeah,
it's that kind of local.
And you're starting to see some vintages for
and the year it was made.
Yeah, for sure.
That actually ties right into my question, because I come from a big background of wine. So, when you're dealing with botanicals and all the things that you're using, for me, I'm like, grapes are different every year. Obviously, the same for you guys. So, do you see? I was going to say, do you see things with terroir driven and stuff? Do you see things moving towards like specialty vintage type things?
The thing I find about, yes, it is very much along in this whole wine, and you got your little, like, everyone loves this little winery. They only produce, they're unapologetic. But you also drink wine different than you drink gin.
Right.
So you open the bottle, you drink the bottle. Not a lot of people are opening the bottle of gin and drinking the bottle.
Only Russians.
And myself, yeah. So it's like, you also have to think about that, and as you think about the ability to produce and get more people to understand what you're doing so you can survive to make the new next fun thing, you do have to think about the accessibility and the scalability. And all of a sudden, with wines, it's like, oh, this is the year, it's going to be this. I think with the gins, since there's so many options out there, like I know for us in the US, we just launched Lemon Drizzle in the US, but it's a limited time offer. It's going to be here when it's gone, which I was very upset with my brand about, because the fact is, you get someone to love something and then you take it away, especially when it comes to spirits, they get real mad.
My question isn't so much, are they going to start doing that? I'm saying, in terms of keeping consistency because of terroir and things, and that's different all the time because seasons and years and things.
Yeah.
So, like, do you see that changing much in terms of the way you label, or, because I know it's very important for you to keep something consistent because you're trying to build loyalty.
The amount of effort to get a label approved by the TTD and then having to do it all over again is kind of a pain in the butt.
Yeah, it's not fun.
It's way different than
That's when the government shuts down.
Yeah, that's what you put some $100 bills in there and you send them.
There's a combination of things. I think for some brands, having the consistency is really important. So for like Sipsmith, like if you're a fan of Sipsmith and you have it in London, or you have it here, or you have whatever state, you want it to taste the same. I mean, being a fan of Knickerbocker for a long time, and it always tastes the same as it did 6 years ago. It's like you can taste it blind. You go, I recognise that, and then you need that consistency. I think maybe with some, and there's a labelling issue of course, but certainly from what we see more like in Europe is you'll have maybe the main brand that's aimed at being consistent, and there are ways that even if you're using locally sourced botanicals that you can keep the consistency or at least mitigate it somewhat. Like distilling several batches together and blending them before we do the bottling and things like that. But there might be some more limited ones might be more vintage. I think there's there's a balance.
I'd like to throw something in. I think your point's very valid, because we sell a lot of spirits across a lot of categories, and very seldom does that question come up. And because people think of spirits as sort of a neutral product versus wine, which is more of a living product, because it's still moving in the bottle as it ages. And that product that makes our spirits be the base of its whatever, molasses or grain or grapes or whatever it may be, is a moving target these days with global farming with weather patterns, availability. We sell fruit brandies, we sell different things. That availability of those ingredients, I do think are critical, and I think, you know, back to what Keli said, as brand scale can be challenging. You know, typically as your brand scales and you feel that, you're gonna bulk up. They're dried ingredients, these botanicals are dried, so they're storable, and they're storable a long time. I think if you go to products over a long period of time, they're definitely different. And you know, if you taste Beefeater's gin from 40, 50 years ago and you had one today, and of course, like Keli said, the ingredients in there die out. But if you were able to get what they made fresh then and fresh today, I'd venture to say there's a difference.
Yeah.
You know, they're made, everything we sell is made from a product that starts off as a fresh product.
And as the brand grows, the potentially sourcing things very locally might not be suitable. I know some gins, they started off, there was a rhubarb gin and they sourced their rhubarb from Queen Victoria's old rhubarb batch or something. And then it was huge and they couldn't still source it from that. Yeah. Like if you had a gin that was getting its water from the Thames originally, and then if they became really big, it would be difficult for them to keep doing that. So, anyway. Yeah, did you guys have any thoughts on trends just before we finish up?
On trends? No, I mean, you know, it's just like it's our constant struggle trying to figure out what's, you know, how to keep our brand relevant and try to, you know, crystal ball everything and figure out what people are going to want next, which is tricky, but pickles. I'm putting it on the board when I get home. Pickles.
I'll give you my address. You just send them all to me.
All right.
Yeah, I think from a high level, we all love gin in this room, but it still makes up such a tiny piece of the spirit world. That the question. What's that?
We're trying to fix
Which
that.
we're trying to fix, but I think a lot of the trends, at least from like a brand management standpoint, we're looking at how to bring people into the category.
Yeah.
So that means mainstream flavor profiles, you know, to give people to try gin first, which we're on the side of flavored gins, you know, fruit-based gins, but I also think, you know, just taking a note from the beer customer, they need a seasonal trend. And I think seasonal gins are a real thing.
And partly what you can source as well.
Yeah,
makes things. Good, lovely. And my thought from the big thing I've seen, even like in the last couple of months in Europe, and nice to sit here as well, is the growth of ready to drink. It's huge. Absolutely huge. Sipsmith have bought them out, and there's a number of other gins. Fevertree in the UK have bought out pre-mixed gin tonics. They've just come out. So there's a real growth in that area. So I think for me that's the one to watch. We'll see.
Well, thank you all for your time. Thank you for our. To be respectful to our host, we are going to wrap up rather quickly here. You will, if you want to, you can reach out to the guests the speakers that were here. If you would do us a favor and grab your, if you do a favor and grab your water glasses and glasses, if you're able to, and move it to the bar, we'll get it all cleaned up. That'll give you more time to chat with the panelists. They're all going to be there Sunday.